Hello and welcome back to Podcast with a K. I'm your host Karla with a K, and I'm here in the studio on another fine Sunday evening for yet another week of random nonsense, which is what you signed up for by coming to the stream. I want to start off by saying I hope everyone has had a fantastic and safe and responsible Halloween weekend. I have loved seeing what everyone's been doing, and I've loved seeing everyone's costumes. I had a series of costumes myself. Yesterday, I had a group outfit with my roommate and one of our friends. We were the Powerpuff Girls. As you may or may not have guessed by the everything about me, I was Blossom. We essentially just picked the colors and stylized an outfit and called it a day. There was so much orange hairspray in my hair. It was such a nightmare to wash out. I think I had to wash my hair like 3 or 4 times. But today, we've got a Reyna from Valorant look, which I'm so excited for because I've been wanting to do this look for a while. I've mentioned before, I'm obsessed with Inkbox, and Inkbox is essentially temporary tattoo ink, similar to henna in that it lasts for a few weeks and, fades away over time. But I'm obsessed. I've been doing ink boxes for I think almost 2 years. And I've been wanting to recreate Reyna's tattoos. And I was like, what better time than Halloween? Especially because, tonight's a podcast night and it's the day after Halloween. It's Day of the Dead. So in essence, I thought it was perfect. So if you're listening on the radio, you can't see it. But if you're watching on Twitch, you can see that I have this beautiful recreation of Reyna's tattoos. And it's quite fitting because Reyna in Valorant is Mexican, and again, just everything comes full circle with Day of the Dead. But yeah, so that's been my weekend. It's been chill, it's been fun, and now here we are. Again, like I said, I'm obsessed with Inkbox. This is something that I've been wanting to do for a while, and this look just really helps you channel that power. But it's interesting too how I know there's obviously a big deal about representation in media, etc. I personally don't know that I've been much one to care about it because I just kind of consume media regardless. But I will say when they added Reyna as a character, I was like, yo, that's so cool. A Mexican character? How sick. Because in Valorant, all of the characters you can play as are from different parts of the world, and that was one of their big selling points as well. I don't know. It's cool to hear her have her little lines in Spanish, but there's that, which I guess is a good segue into today's conversation and series of topics that I have for y'all. Obviously, I want to talk about Day of the Dead for a bit, but before we do, I guess we can transition into the actual conversation with a quick little song break, because this is going to kick off everything, I think, quite beautifully. So first up for you guys, I have absolute bop. All of these, okay, I'll explain these after, actually, because it'll make more sense once I start talking. Anyway, first up, Un Poco Loco from Coco, sang by Anthony Gonzalez and Gael Garcia Bernal. Like I said, perfect segue into today's conversation, which is my unsolicited opinion and thoughts on the Book of Life versus Coco. And I have a lot of show notes because I have a lot to discuss. So, obviously, Day of the Dead is a thing that exists. In case, I guess, you don't know, or you're new to the concept, or it's not something you've ever cared about, which, you shouldn't have to if it's not your thing. Anyway, whatever. Day of the Dead is, it's essentially a couple of days. It's November 1st and 2nd, where in primarily Mexico, it's a Mexican thing. I know that in other countries that have, I guess, different populations, I think Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, and Guatemala, if I remember correctly, also have Day of the Dead type celebrations. Anyway, it celebrates the life of those who have passed rather than mourning their death. So the first day, which is November 1st, is meant to celebrate the life of children who have passed, and the second day, November 2nd, is meant to celebrate the life of, adults who have passed. And I think it's quite telling of Mexican culture that Day of the Dead is what it is, because overall, in general, the culture, I think, aims to be more lighthearted uh whenever it's something that's not a serious issue, if that makes sense. Like, not to reference the Kardashians, but you know the clip where she loses an earring in the ocean and she's like, Kim, there's people that are dying. That's essentially the vibe. But anyway, Day of the Dead celebrates the life of those who have passed, and there's different like traditions and things. I know personally my family doesn't do like the altar that is mostly associated with it. Really all we do is we'll get pan de muerto, have chocolate abuelita, hang out, discuss family things. And that's it. That's our Day of the Dead. And I know some people actually do go all out and set up an altar and like have like the whole family over and everything. But that's just not what I guess my family ever did. And so meeting people who actually do all of that was super, super cool, because I'm like, wow, like people actually really lean into it. Because for me before, it was kind of just like a concept that I knew of, and I was like, well, it's a Mexico thing. I guess they celebrate it in Mexico. We're not in Mexico, so we're not like trying to make a huge deal about it. But in general, like my family, like over there, like everyone just kind of hangs together anyway. Like they'll come together for dinner or something. So for them, it's kind of just, general tradition. It's not like it's spectacularly a big deal, but it is a significant occasion. And it's always cool to like see what stories come up, because you always learn something new about your family. But yeah, like I like it. It's super, super wholesome. I remember talking to some friends in high school, and somebody mentioned like, oh, isn't it like insensitive? Like you're making light of death. You're making fun of death. I'm like, no, dude, death isn't at fault here. Like death as an entity is simply that, That's why you celebrate the life of the loved ones instead of, mourning the fact that they're gone. And it also, I think, helps with coping and moving on. But like, the only time that I've ever set up like an altar or something was actually for a school project. Me and my friend paired up, and we could make like a Prezi or a PowerPoint or a video. And of course, we chose to make a video. So we made a video about Day of the Dead. And as a part of it, we set up an altar to, display it instead of having to like find stock footage or just like have a slideshow of pictures in the video. And they're doing that, like, well, obviously my mom like told me like, all right, well, what people do is this and that. And so I looked it up, and then we like picked different things. So we had like pan de muerto. For kids, there's usually like toys and things that they liked. For adults, it's kind of tradition to have like liquor, like tequila or mezcal. Or they'll set out like atole or champurrado, which is kind of just like a really thick hot chocolate. I'm not a huge fan of it because the texture throws me off, but like that is a thing that exists and people like it, and it's good. The flavor's fine. It's just the texture. I can't get past the texture. But so you'll put different things out like that. There'll be cempasúchil, which I think is marigolds, because the brightness of the petals and the scent of the flower is supposed to help guide the spirits. I think it means like 20 flowers or something in Nahuatl. I don't remember. I'll have to watch my own video. Candles, of course, sugar skulls, and then just different, like obviously pictures of your loved ones or things that they liked, things that were significant to them, to help guide them home, quote unquote. And some people do this like at the actual like graveyard. Other people just kind of do it at home, like in like the comfort and privacy of their own house or whatever. But yeah, the only time I've ever done that was for that project. And it was interesting because I was like, since we don't do this, like I don't have like a huge framed picture of like any loved one or anything. So what I did was we printed out a picture of of Pedro Infante, who was a famous Mexican actor, singer, human being, was. And I remember showing the video in class, and that teacher was interesting. She lived the type of life where she traveled a lot, she moved around a lot, so she felt that she was very cultured and very knowledgeable about things. And she asked me, was the picture on the altar of like my grandfather or something? And I was like, ma'am, that is a Mexican icon. If only I was in some way related to this man. But that always just kind of stuck with me. And not to go on a tangent, not to ramble for about nothing for, another X amount of time, but this project was so difficult to do, not because of like content or anything, but because of what happened. And what happened was we were filming around my neighborhood, and we'd gone to like this, I guess, community like type thing. It's open, but it's like, it's a different like section of the neighborhood. And as we were filming, we because there's train tracks nearby, so we were like, oh, we could get like a really cool creepy shot like for the lead in of the train tracks with the trees in the background. It's gonna look so sick, and it's cloudy, so it's gonna look good. And so we're filming, and we see a car go by. We see a car go by on the other side of the tracks. We see the car go by again and again, and then the third time, and I'm like, okay, we're super close to my house. If we see that car again, we run because I'm scared. So the car comes back again, and we're literally getting ready to just book it to my house, and lights flash. We hear a little chirp thing. It's a cop. And so the cop comes out, and he tells us, what are y'all doing on my tracks? And I'm like, what you mean your tracks? We're filming a school project. And he's like, you're not supposed to be here. What's your name? So we start saying our information, and he's like being a little like aggy about it. And I'm like, dude, I live right there. Like literally, like you can go and talk to my mother. Like, I don't know what we did wrong, because we're not like standing on the tracks. We're like walking along the tracks. And so he took our information. We're standing there for like 20 minutes. He mocked my name for no reason, but that's besides the point. And so we're like, dude, what even is happening right now? He finally lets us go. And then we realize, oh my God, he thought we were like runaways or something, because we're walking on the tracks. We're holding like white sheets and blankets, because we had, again, it was a like Day of the Dead Halloween type video. And so we were pretending to be ghosts in the woods for the clip, right? And we're like, oh my God, because in this community, it was like a place where a lot of like foster homes are located. And we were like, he genuinely thought we were just runaways, because it looks like we were holding like all of our life belongings. It was the craziest thing ever. And so that project like has so many little tangents to go on because of everything that went down for it. But anyway, that's not even what I'm here to talk about. That was that was a component of it. What else did I want to say? Oh, the sugar skulls thing. So like, again, if you're listening, you can't see it. If you're watching, you can see it. My mask today is sugar skull themed because sugar skulls are a thing. And it's not really like a big thing to do sugar skull makeup like on Day of the Dead. Like you can if you want to. It's not like a huge thing, but it is here because I feel like since we're not, in the country, we like to feel in some way connected to it. And so like I've always seen that like as a trend here in the States, around Day of the Dead, I'll see people post like, especially of course with the internet, I'll see people post with the makeup and stuff. And my dad was like, that's not really a thing people do. And I'm like, we created a new tradition just for the aesthetic. And so it's interesting to see also sugar skulls on everything, like all season, everywhere, especially whenever it's not related to Day of the Dead. Because at first I was like, wow, Day of the Dead is like huge. And then I was like, oh no, people just like the aesthetic. All right, cool, sick. But anyway, yeah. So that's what Day of the Dead is. And there are the two movies that I want to discuss are based on Day of the Dead. And it's cool to have these movies exist. I know my mother's pointed out that like very often when you see things about like, especially for kids or in animation or decoration, I guess, about things that have to do with Mexico, you always see like Day of the Dead things. And I guess it's one of the, if not the biggest holiday or events that Mexico is known for. But it's interesting to see that be a recurring theme, especially with these two movies being Coco and the Book of Life, which follows such a like similar storyline for no reason. But before I get into that, let me give y'all another song because I love it. And I feel like I've been rambling for nothing, and I need a better like clean slate to go on. So up next I have Te Amo y Más from the Book of Life, sung by Diego Luna, composed by Gustavo Santaolalla, which, fun fact, is also the composer of the soundtrack for The Last of Us. So I love this man's work. But yeah, anyway, here you go. That. So yeah, a beautiful, beautiful song that I love and is in my general playlist. But yeah, so I want to talk about the Book of Life versus Coco because I feel like I've seen this article like 80 times on the internet, but none of the opinions were mine. So here you go. You're welcome. So Book of Life came first. It was produced by Guillermo del Toro, who you know of just, general Hollywood fame because he's amazing, and directed by Jorge Gutierrez. Coco, however, so the main difference here was that the Book of Life was essentially produced and directed by Latin Americans, but the discourse around this was that the cast was not centered on Latin American actors, whereas Coco was the first like high budget film, I think, animated film to feature an all Latin cast, even though it was produced by people who weren't Latin American or Latin in general. And so I remember that being a huge discussion between the two movies because, like I said, the two movies follow a very similar storyline. Book of Life is more of a love story. Coco's about like the importance of family or whatever. I'm saying or whatever, which sounds like super jaded, but I'm saying like that's not like the main point of this sentence. But they both have like a very like strong emphasis on like music being significant. Like they both have like the protagonist who wants to play music but can't, and the music is frowned upon or something because they're supposed to do something else. One's supposed to be a bullfighter, the other one's supposed to be a shoemaker. Yeah, shoemaker. So there's that. The protagonist in some way like dies and has to go to, the land of the dead, whatever we're calling it. And then there's also the appearance of somebody getting crushed by a giant bell. So like I said, the stories are like similar. It's not like it's impossible for someone to come up with this concept. However, for all of those things to happen in both movies is interesting. And so like I said, I remember one of the main arguments was the production team versus the cast, and vice versa for either movie. The budget for the Book of Life was significantly lower, I think. It was like, I think 50 million versus 200 million for Coco. So like visually, of course, the movies look completely different. There's different amount of work that went into them. I remember reading that for Coco, because they knew that they were producing a movie about Mexico when no one in the like group was Mexican, they did like trips to Mexico to try to like learn more about the culture. They brought in like experts to discuss because they wanted to do it right. They wanted to get everything like as close to accurate as possible. They didn't want to offend anyone, which I feel like was a smart move on their part because they tried to trademark the phrase Dia de Muertos, which is Day of the Dead. And I'm like, how are you going to copyright a holiday for a movie? And so they dropped that completely. And I feel like that was kind of their wake-up call to like, yo, if we're going to do this, we need to do it right. And so they did. And like once it was over and done with, everyone that kind of was complaining, I guess, about Coco being a ripoff of the Book of Life, I feel like the general public's opinion shifted away from that into being like, wait, Coco was actually like the Book of Life but done right. Because the Book of Life is really, really pretty and I love it. And like I said, the soundtrack is amazing and I love the song that was just on, and the composer and the actors and everything. Like it was a really good movie. However, the story, I guess, in comparison to Coco feels a little lazy now, like in retrospect, because it is just kind of like another love story in which like Day of the Dead isn't even like the main focus. It's just kind of like what's the phrase? The I think it's like Deus Ex Machina, where it's just like the Day of the Dead is like the way that like the problem gets solved. It's not about Day of the Dead so much as like it's just kind of like a plot device. Um, but if yeah, so if it wasn't for the Day of the Dead, the guy couldn't have like died, come back, and like happy ever after. Whereas with Coco, it's more so like I guess about Day of the Dead, in which like as you go through the movie, you learn more about Day of the Dead, and it's not like an educational video. Like it doesn't feel like you're watching a presentation about what is the Day of the Dead, what is Mexican culture. It's just very like subtly included. I mean, subtly, it's super bold and vibrant, but like the teachable moments, I guess, about it are subtly ingrained, and like there's little like cultural references that if you know type thing. So like for example, there's like the scene where the grandma goes to throw the shoe at him, and it's like a thing, right, for que te avienten la chancla. And the Book of Life didn't really have a lot of those little references. Mostly it was just the actors that were involved. Because Book of Life, I think, was meant to be just more so a movie in which Day of the Dead is included, not a movie about Day of the Dead. And I think that's where most of the criticism lies. But I'm like, I don't think that was the intent to begin with. So like, you can't critique a movie based on something it wasn't even aiming to do. Whereas with Coco, like I said, the production team was very like set on deliberately doing things right and representing the culture and like teaching about the culture and showing off the holiday for what it is. And both movies were beautiful. Like they're both visually stunning. Book of Life has, I think, more of like, I think, a wooden texture. Like they look like wooden figures. I don't know if they actually are. I should have looked this up before the show. But Coco is like very like Disney style animated, and it reminded me actually of a video that was super popular. It was made by like some kids in like film school for like an animation project, and I actually used it in the project that I was mentioning earlier. But the animation style is very, very similar, and so like as pretty and as beautiful and like as amazing as Coco is, like I can't let go of the fact that it pulls a lot from a lot of places. And like sure, it could have been inspired by it, but I feel like it could have done a better way of not seeming like it's copying. It's kind of like what I mentioned last week about One Direction songs being inspired, quote unquote, by like 80s hits or like by other bands, but also being very obviously in the style of those bands, but and never actually acknowledging it. It's like, we know what you're doing. Like you're not fooling anyone. But I don't know. I still do think it's cool. And like another thing that Coco did was like the alebrijes, the mythical creature things, and the dog. The dog is actually like a dog that's specific. It's a cholo, I think is what it's called in short. But like there's like a lot of like little like references and stuff like that, of course. But I guess my main thing with both stories is that like I said, you can't judge them on something that they weren't attempting to do. And so for me, like I don't have a problem with the Book of Life. I no longer have a problem with Coco. But I do kind of wish that there was more to, I guess, represent from the culture than just Day of the Dead, because it's really cool if you don't know what Day of the Dead is and you're like being brought into like this world that you had no idea of, or if you just didn't know a lot about the holiday. But I don't know, I feel like I'm seeking to be like, from my perspective, I would like to see a movie that focuses more on things that aren't super like commonly or popularly known, right? Because then like you're actually like engaged in it, even if you already feel a part of the culture, because otherwise it's really easy to kind of get like swayed or shifted into critiquing the movie, and that might just be like the the like film student in me, and that's just who I am as a person. But I feel like if you're learning, you're too busy to judge it. But I will say that like the music for both of them is perfect, and I am a sucker for movies that have such a like huge focus on the music. But like I don't know. I feel like a big thing also between the movies was Book of Life was more I think meant to, that was I guess the references that like it meant to tie you in with like there's a cover of I think Creep and it's like for what, bro? Why is this a thing that you guys wanted to do? And like you're watching it and you see that and like that's like the reference that there is to like gain, right? Like the music I guess is what brings the audience in like in a if you know you know type of way. um Whereas Coco did that more so with the culture, right? 'Cause I think for the Book of Life, I do remember reading that what is his name, Gutierrez, the director, he didn't want them to do like trips to Mexico and stuff like that because he felt like it would be too touristy and they wouldn't get a good understanding of it. So any questions that they had about the holiday or the culture or anything could be directed to him or the production team. And I was like, okay, that's interesting because that would be like if I was doing this project and I said refer all questions to me and I like only have half the facts. I barely know what I'm talking about. Everything I know is anecdotal, right? But yeah, that's a tangent that I also was not meaning to go on. Here to critique the movies. But oh, so like what I think is that Coco kind of just wanted to take what had already been done in the past but do it quote unquote right. Like they had a vision that was inspired by it, but they wanted to essentially do it in the way that they thought it should have been done, if that makes sense. Because, like I said, Book of Life, I don't think was meant to educate anyone about the holiday. It was pretty and it like focused around the holiday, but Coco, I think, wanted to fill in more of the gaps. And actually, just as a little side note, the bad guy, I guess, in it, Ernesto de la Cruz. So I mentioned Pedro Infante before for my other project, and in the planning for Ernesto de la Cruz, they said he was meant to be like the Mexican Frank Sinatra, you know, bigger, bolder than life. And in designing him, they had Pedro Infante in mind, which is pretty cool because, like I said, those are like little like, cultural things that people pick up on, and it's like, hey, I get that. But oh, another similarity I just remembered, like somebody dies of poison in both movies. I don't know, man. There's just so many things in common. Like, and they try to say like, oh, we're not copying it. You know, it's our own thing. We were just inspired. Like, no, you took the story, and you changed it, but like, it's very clearly inspired by it. I wonder what like the next genre of like culture movies is gonna be for Mexico at the very least. Because I feel like we've seen Day of the Dead a lot, and to see it again, it's just gonna be kind of repetitive and redundant. And if I'm already spent all this time critiquing just two movies, imagine adding a third one into the mix, you know? It's just going to be like, oh, well, this one did this and this and this and this is based off of the ones that the previous ones did. Like, you know, it just kind of turns into like that like type of feedback loop. But yeah, anyway, those are my thoughts on those movies. Long story short, I like both of them. I think one's just a movie, one's more of like a exhibition, if you will, of the holiday. I personally love Day of the Dead and the concept of it. I wish that it was a bigger part, I guess, of like my family's like activities, but like I do like how we celebrate it. It's nice, it's wholesome, it's sweet. And I always wonder like what am I gonna do whenever it's like me in charge? Like what if whenever I'm like my own adultiest adult? Because I don't know, I can't see myself putting up an altar, but maybe someday that'll change. Just seems like a lot of work. And also, I'll talk about this later too. The whole like guiding the spirits back or whatever, like I feel like I've watched too many horror movies to want to interact. I don't want to talk to a ghost. I don't know how to talk to a ghost. That's its own topic though. Let's do another song break, shall we? Here, up next, again, from the soundtrack. So we've done one from Coco, we've done one from Book of Life. Let's take it back to Coco. This is Llorona by Alana Obak and Antonio Sol. Okay, so during the song break, got some really interesting things here in chat. So, up next for you guys, based on this song, because La Llorona, I'm sure you all know, there was a movie about this too, and this movie I was mad about because it was Like, there was not a single Mexican in this production team or in the cast, and it was about like, I guess Mexico's most famous ghost, which is like, I don't know, which is the Weeping Woman. Legend has it that I think like she got cheated on, so she drowned her kids, and now he drowned the kids. The kids were drowned, and so now she like goes by bodies of water, weeping for them to lure people in, or something. Anyway, so speaking of that, let's do ghost stories, shall we? In chat, as was mentioned, about interacting with ghosts, Eamon said that there are people who say that they could have a grasp on it and communicating so that it's not dangerous, but it could get out of control, which is kind of what I think, because I'm like, how do you know what you're even talking to, right? Like, you just know that it's not a current human presence. And she said that there's a belief in Islam that anything you contact while awake is not a ghost, but a jinn pretending to be a ghost, which is crazy. Because like, yeah, how do you know what it is that you're interacting with? Apparently there are also practices in Islam that reflect the belief that we can reach out to family members who passed, but it's frowned upon by conservative Muslims. Her mom believes in it. It's a lot of tradition carried over from pre-Islam. Yeah, so like that's interesting. See, like these little like similarities, spirituality, man. But like on that wave, like I don't know if I would be comfortable interacting with a ghost, because like I don't know whether or not I can trust it. Like I don't have a way to verify it, and like I mentioned, I'm obsessed with supernatural at this point, so I'm like, and like essentially in media, especially like whenever it's like stuff taken from other like mythologies and beliefs and religions, etc., like there's the concept of like you could be interacting with, like, for example, like a demon pretending to be something, because if this is a malevolent entity, it doesn't feel remorse, it doesn't feel guilt, so what's going to stop it from pretending to be, you know, something else just for the sake of being evil, right? So it's like, I'm not doing that. But anyway, I asked on Instagram earlier for people to share if they had any ghost stories or anything of the sort, because I wanted to talk about this. But I'm also saying in chat real quick. She said, Eamon said, a girl told her a story about meeting La Llorona, which was apparently enough to have her still shook, because it came to her in a dream, and in Islam there's a belief that dreams are the only way you can quote-unquote see a jinn or a departed loved one instead of IRL, which is wild. I'll talk about dreams in a second. But okay, so here are the stories we got. All right. So one is that this girl's mother got a job like as a part of like the overnight cleaning crew, and so she was, you know, just doing her job. Every now and then she would you know, hear something, but she would, you know, disregard it. It's just like, oh, maybe there's someone else in the building, maybe it's just whatever going on. And one time she thought she saw like an old lady, like maybe a teacher or something, because I think it was a school building, just kind of like, you know, there. And she was like, oh, maybe she's like working late or something. That's weird. No one's supposed to be here. But whatever. And so she mentioned it later to a coworker, and they were like, yeah, no one's supposed to be here. Yeah, every now and then we'll see something, but it just be like that. And I'm like, how do you just discard? Like, okay, so two possible things. Someone either broke into the building, or that's a whole ghost. And it's just kind of like accepted by this cleaning crew. And I'm like, dang, y'all really want to secure the bag that hard, huh? And it reminded me of like every now and then my dad would say at one of the places he worked that there was like the ghost of some girl, and it wasn't like a bad presence. It just kind of felt like she wanted to play. And I was always just like, you can't just say things like that and expect me to not be scared of one, ghosts, or two, of you going to work, because I was a child. So yeah, like I don't understand how people can just accept that there is a presence that is not supposed to be there. Maybe I'm just a scaredy cat. That could also very much explain it. Another story on this similar wave. This kid comments that they were in a house and asleep, and woke up to see somebody standing above them holding a knife, and then like, snap out of it, the thing is gone. And later, looking up, they found out that somebody had been like murdered by stabbing in the house. So this person moved out of the house pretty soon after, which I think is the logical choice here. Like I said, I'm not one to mess with entities. If something manifests in front of me, I'm out. I don't want to do anything about it. I don't want to have to deal with it. Not my scene. And it reminded me of, okay, so this is a conversation I had the day before yesterday. We were talking about like having weird dreams, and so this kid was talking about like kind of on the wave of lucid dreaming, like say that he's dreaming that he's in danger or something, he'll snap out of it, and be like, oh wait, this is a dream, and just kind of like take over and snap into like main character mode, right? And I was like, man, that's crazy, because whenever I have dreams that I'm like in danger and stuff, it's super annoying, because whether or not I realize that it's a dream, like in the dream, like my response is to like freeze. Like I either like can't like call out, or I can't like physically like respond. I'm like frozen. He's like, oh, that's just sleep paralysis. And I was like, what? He's like, yeah, that's sleep paralysis. I'm like, but I thought that was like when you're like awake and aware, not like in the dream. He's like, no, like it can happen. I mean, it happens because you're asleep, but like you're like on the edge of being aware of it, because like I've heard, like you can't die in a dream, I guess, because like you can't create the concept that your brain doesn't already know. But I was like, oh my god, that's crazy. What? Because I was like, I thought it was like, because okay, so if I experience sleep paralysis, it's usually like I wake up and I'm like, I can't move, this is annoying, whatever. And it's only been like really really bad like once or twice, to where like I thought I saw again someone standing like at the foot of my bed, and I was like, is that like my sister, is that like my dad who's here, like what's going on, like do I have to get up, like what's going on? And like the figure doesn't respond, and I'm like, what? And then like snap out of it, and the figure's gone, and I'm like, that was a ghost. And then I'm like, oh no, that was sleep paralysis. And so like that's what I thought it was, like you're awake and you're conscious, you just can't snap out of it. But to apparently experience that like in a dream, and like I can't even like be aware enough to like snap out of it, at the very least just like to shake the mental image of like the dream scene, or like at least be back in my room. I'm like, that's crazy, that's scary, bro. Like what if this is a dream? What if I'm about to like realize that I'm in sleep paralysis or something? Like now I'm scared to look around. Why do I do this? I hate spooky season to be over. Anyway, another one of the comments was that as a kid, this girl would see like a woman walking around like towards and into the fireplace, like I guess like, oh god, like fading into it. And I asked her like for follow-up, and she didn't respond. I wish there was more to this story, but that's crazy. And then the last response was ridiculous, because I was like, have you ever experienced a supernatural thing like personally? And the response was like, yeah, I saw two best friends and they were both pretty. And on that note, that ends the submissions that I have decided to accept for this segment. In chat, Eamon says her mom, after she told her she felt like something was watching her, she was like, I always knew there was something in that room after living there for 23 years. That is terrifying, Amen. Okay, I don't know if I talked about this on the show last week, or if I talked about this in person after the show, but this was a conversation that happened last week around this time. But it was about like, there's people who can just like sense things, right? Like kids are creepy. Like we've all seen those stories where it's about like how a kid will say something about like a grandparent or like a family member that they like never knew, or aren't even like old enough to be aware about, and it's like, wow, that's crazy. Like how would they know unless ghosts? And I'm like, what if so what if things do exist and there's just some people that can sense it, some people who can't, or like maybe there's those who are like open enough and like willing to accept it, and that's the people that can perceive it, and there's people who are like too scared to even give themselves the chance, because that's crazy. Like I guess on the same wave as religion in general, like you choose what to believe in, and like that, to you it's real. And so I'm like, what if that's just everything? Like what if everything ever actually does exist? Like, and I'm talking about everything. I'm talking about like cryptids, like the Loch Ness monster. I swear to God, has to be real. But I'm talking about like every single one of these entities. If they do exist, we're just like literally turning a blind eye to them, and that's wild. And essentially, that's the premise of Supernatural. Somehow we always end up here. But yeah, that's such a like crazy concept to think about, because like, for example, like I'm sitting here so like willing to accept like, oh yes, like the universe, a higher power, God, confirmed, accepted. But I'm sitting here like, ghosts though, nah. Like, dang, that's crazy. I wonder what shapes that. Probably just, what you're taught and like your upbringing and like who you develop your life around. But like I said, even in Mexican culture, like the existence of like spirits and stuff is pretty accepted, considering we have a whole holiday about guiding them home and interacting with them. And I will say, like, that does feel kind of like more real to me than anything, right? But I'm like, if ghosts have to be real, or not ghosts, like spirits, if those entities have to be real, I would prefer for them to stick to the rules of like they're invited to hang once a year for a weekend or so, and that's it. Other than that, please do not haunt me. What a weird note to end this segment on. Take one more comment because I see that our time is unfortunately drawing to a close. Eamon says she's never been like her mom, where she dreams combos with people and senses the princess of Jinn and just banishes them. No thoughts, head empty always. But then she had experiences at home while alone, and then another time in March there was a dream where in hindsight was the scariest. In Islam, you can only visually perceive things when they contact you through a dream. So after the dream, she was like, I can't ignore this anymore. So you feel like you were personally like targeted? Question mark? I think my weirdest like just like personal like not normal I guess experience is like I'll have a dream of like something happening and then it'll happen and I'm like, is that deja vu? No, that's not deja vu, because like I'll follow like the order of events, and if it's gonna go sour, I'm like, wait, I already dreamt this. I have to change everything right now. I have to do something out of character or something, and just like wait for something to like snap out of it, like to break that loop. But yeah, I think that's like my weirdest. I don't have any like personal ghost stories other than the freaking sleep paralysis thing, which was weird, and like I can't believe it took this long to learn about that being more more intense than I thought. Eamon said she told her mom she felt something was watching her, and she was like, yeah, lol. So shook. Yeah, that's crazy, Eamon. Please move. Can they follow you? Do Jinn follow you, or is it kind of like your typical movie ghost that's like tied to a house or an object or something? That's interesting. But yeah, that's that. I do see that we've got about a minute left of airtime, so I will send you guys off with one more song, another selection from the Book of Life. This one is No Matter Where You Are by Us the Duo. Again, such a bop. Thank you so much for listening and spending this spooky season series with me as I ramble on about everything and nothing all at once. You've been listening to WECS 90.1 FM. This is Podcast with a K, and I'm your host, Karla with a K, signing off. I hope you have a fantastic week. Stay safe, stay warm, because it's cold now and I hate it. I had to wear an actual winter jacket over here, and it's been rainy. Although I will say it snowed the other day. Was it Thursday or Friday? I think it was Friday, and it was beautiful, and I love the snow, but God, at what cost? Thank you so much for listening. If you're listening on this station, thank you so much for watching. If you're watching on Twitch, thank you for hanging out in chat. Yeah, that's all I got for you tonight, so I'll see you next week at the same time, same station, with new nonsense, and maybe finally some new guests. Peace out.